Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Say It Brave webinar. Don't forget to pack your recovery, taking care of you over the holidays, presented by Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. I'm really grateful that you're here tonight. Next week is Thanksgiving, and so many of us are experiencing anxiety, and we have some very special speakers that are going to help us address Thanksgiving triggers, holiday travel, and so many things that are probably on our minds. I want to take a moment to acknowledge your courage for being here tonight and for practicing some self-care and taking some time for you. That can be hard to do nowadays, and we're proud of you, all of us at Say It Brave. For those of you who don't know, Say It Brave is an inclusive community. We provide honest conversation and free resources for mental health. A few housekeeping notes. You are able to ask questions to our presenters tonight. There is a chat box, and just feel free at any point in the webinar to write your questions there. I've also received some via email, so I'll be sure to share those at the end of the webinar, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. A few other housekeeping notes. This is recorded, and we will be sending it out in case you have friends or loved ones that you think this will help. We also have a great resource designed by Meredith called Tips for the Table that I know I'm going to be using next week at Thanksgiving, and I'd encourage you to check it out. It's at our website at eatingrecoverycenter.com/say-it-brave, or just go to our website and check out the resource section. You'll see Say It Brave there. You can download that resource as well as a self-reflection tool, which you can use as we go throughout the webinar or after the webinar to reflect on your own experiences around this topic. So thank you once again for joining us. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our nonprofit partner, who we are so incredibly grateful for and has joined us tonight. Sabrina Skanga is of the Eating Disorder Foundation. She's the program director. She passionately helps develop and sustain the foundation's education and support programming for individuals and their families. Sabrina holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the Metropolitan State University of Denver and is currently working on her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling at University of Northern Colorado. Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Will you take a few minutes to share about the Eating Disorder Foundation and the incredible work you all do?
Happily, yes. Thank you for letting us contribute and be a part of this evening's event. So yeah, I'm happy to kind of explain a little bit just about who EDF is and what we are. So we are also a nonprofit. We've been around since 2003, and our mission, aligned with the others here today, I'm sure, are to be a prevention and elimination of eating disorders through education, support, and advocacy efforts. And services that are free and that are accessible. So that's something that we are very passionate about, knowing that there's many barriers out there in recovery to begin with. So we really want to have an open door and an easy door to walk in through, metaphorically now, because we're all virtual. But when I say, who is EDF, we're a fairly small staff. We have 3 full-time staff members, 1 part-time staff member, and then a massive support system of volunteers and community. And that really is who we are. And even though we are a Denver-based foundation, this year we're now serving all states, even individuals reaching out of the country to help accommodate the challenges that we've been kind of all adjusting into isolation this year long term. So this is how we can really even grow our community. And we really invite people at all stages. So what's different about EDF than maybe like a treatment program or treatment facility is that though we do specialize in providing care for families and individuals who have been impacted by eating disorders in some way, we don't do any direct clinical services at the foundation. We really aim to supplement treatment with our support groups and with our community and connections to help kind of improve that access to care. So we enjoy spending time collaborating with other organizations and treatment facilities. And we know that everybody's path is really unique and different. So part of what EDF would do would be to help kind of create what treatment might, or what recovery rather, might look like for you or for your family. Because we know that that's a really different for so many people, right? We're all so unique. So regardless of all the different demographics that can sometimes make us feel really separated from others, we really want to help build and provide options for what treatment and recovery might look like for you, because sometimes that looks really different. So a little bit about our support groups. We have over 14 support groups online. They're all free. They're on a drop-in basis. We have groups starting from adolescent age, 13 to 17. We have a men's support group, LGBTQ+. We even have groups for individuals who are over the age of 30. We really try to create a space for everybody. In addition to those support groups, we have mentorship programs. We also provide workshops on different topics throughout the year, and just help, to educate families or educate other organizations about eating disorders, and weight stigma and body image, and how we can be more inclusive as a culture. So I'm really excited to hear what Lindsey and Meredith have to share tonight as well. And I just want to extend an invitation to anybody that would feel like they could use some additional support or an additional community to reach out to. Please just give us a call. Finding us on the website that's listed here is the best way to get all information. We do have a workshop coming up in 2 weeks as well for holiday support. So keep an eye on that and sign up for a newsletter. That's the best way to stay up to date with everything.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. We are so grateful for the work that you do. And I've heard from many people in the Say It Brave community that they love your support groups. So we're really appreciative that you joined us tonight and for being our community partner for this webinar. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So now I'd like to introduce your Say It Brave team for tonight. My name is Shannon Kopp. I'm a National Recovery Advocate for Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Centers. I'm also the author of a book, Pound for Pound. I'd like to introduce Lindsey Hall. Lindsey is an eating disorder recovery speaker and writer. She is an award-winning writer and focuses on what she refers to as the nitty-gritty topics not discussed. Having struggled with the eating disorder cycle for many years, Lindsey has actively been in her coined flexible recovery since 2014 and is the author behind I Haven't Shaved in 6 Weeks, a blog written to humanize the stigmas of eating disorders and treatment. Through her published writing, she has had the privilege of speaking around the world on nuanced topics such as body dysmorphic disorder, drunkorexia, exercise addiction, orthorexia, and other eating disorder behaviors, and has been featured in publications including The Today Show, CBS, Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, Women's Health, She Knows, NEDA, Shape Magazine, Refinery 29, and more. Her future plans in recovery advocacy are currently focused on owning and converting a van to take it on the road so she can report on treatment centers and eating disorder resources around the country. It's a dream she's envisioned as recovery on the road. And we're going to hear from her in just a minute. I'm also going to introduce Meredith Nisbet. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a member of our clinical response team at Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. Meredith enjoys engaging with patients, families, and providers seeking admission nationwide. In addition to her work for ERC and Pathlight and in her private practice, Meredith also provides education and training on weight stigma and health at every size, informed care around the country. Meredith earned her bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and her master's degree in marriage and family therapy from East Carolina University. She is actually, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but is in the final steps. What is it, Meredith, of her pursuing her accreditation as a certified eating disorder specialist through IDEP, which is a really big deal.
Thank you.
right?
Finally done. I'm about to submit.
Almost done. She resides in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she spends her free time listening to true crime podcasts, practicing hot yoga, and snuggling with her dog, Mac. To both of you, thank you so much for joining us and spending your evening with Say It Brave. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Meredith to start our presentation, and then we'll hear from Lindsey very shortly.
Thanks, Shannon. So I just wanted to kick us off with some guiding lights for holiday travel and food from the clinical perspective. Lindsey's going to get into her lived experience and what it's been like for her during these times as she's supporting and maintaining her own recovery. But from the clinical perspective, just a few takeaways to kick us off. So I would encourage you to welcome in your support system instead of pushing them away. We all know that eating disorders thrive in secrecy and isolation. And for a lot of people, recovery means becoming radically open with those that you trust so that they can support you when you need it most. You don't have to go through this alone, and it is an encouraged thing to lean on your support system. We also want you to prioritize yourself in your recovery. Think about what are your values. These external factors, like some of the things Lindsey's going to talk about, like calorie counts, airline seats, your travel partner's schedule, their hunger and fullness cues, their food choices, those things have to take a backseat to your needs when you're trying to support your own recovery. And then we want to acknowledge the significance of holidays and holiday food. This is a meaningful time of year for a lot of people, whether it's in a positive or a negative way. And it's important to focus on self-compassion. Believe it or not, binging is a part of the normal human food experience, and so is pleasure. All of these things exist on a spectrum. And so instead of assigning value to how you ate or what you ate, consider how you can be more compassionate towards yourself as you participate in these culturally and relationally significant traditions. I know a lot of families have foods that they only make for certain holidays, or that, it's a prized food that, grandma makes the best. And I think it's important that we are compassionate with ourselves as we strive to stay present during the holidays. Can we test our psychological flexibility and allow ourselves to eat more freely and without judgment? And this is true across diagnoses and also for subclinical if you don't have a diagnosis, but this is something you really struggle with. And then finally, create your toolkit ahead of time. So Lindsey's going to run us through a lot of tips that are really helpful, and I call them collectively the toolkit. So what will I do if I'm feeling triggered? Consider having preemptive conversations with a trusted family member about plating or other support accommodations that will help you structure these holidays or these meals in a helpful way. Maybe pick a few meditations, a book, a movie, a podcast, other self-care distraction activities that you know are helpful for you when you're feeling distressed. And if you struggle to receive support from your family, like a lot of us do, have an on-call support person who's not a family member or maybe not present available via phone or text in case you need a break. So you still have somebody that you can tap in and say, hey, I really need some support right now. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsey to talk a little bit about her experiences.
Awesome. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Shannon. Love that. All right, so starting it off is let's talk about the reality of holiday travel. Of course, I had to start with a meme because I thought this was pretty funny. I think we saw this one a lot during the quarantine time, round one. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and unfortunately, we're pretty much in round two as we speak. So it's usually worth it to see our family and friends when we travel. This year is definitely a little bit of a different year for most of us, but some of us are still traveling and trying to travel safely, or we want to see our families or friends, etc. So what are the realities when you're traveling in recovery? Again, a couple other memes because I thought they're pretty funny. But leading right into, I got a series of 7 tips, and Meredith is going to chime in some as well as we talk through them. But this is just kind of through my lived experience. I've been in recovery for 8 years, so that means that I have gone through 8 holiday seasons. I can attest that it does get easier as time goes on, and yet there are still always triggers and always things and boundaries that I've had to learn how to set in place. Some that I knew to set in place year one, some that I didn't know how to set in place until this past year. But these are just a few of them. Not all of them are my own lived experience. Some of them have been from other people within the community, or that we've read about from other people and et cetera, because we're all one big community and all trying to figure this out together. So tip number 1, Some of these, again, are going to be for more the airport, and some are going to be for more car travel, and then there's some are going to be for when we're already there with our family or friends. So number one, pack food or be prepared to spend some dough. Many of us have an interesting relationship with food and finances. Although I don't want to speak for everyone, I definitely do. And I think that there's something with scarcity sometimes, and especially when we're living in an age where COVID has put a lot of us into some financial scarcity mindsets, depending on our situations. So one of the things that I've come up with is pack your food if you don't want to spend a pretty penny at the airport, where a granola bar costs like $4 at the Hudson News convenience store, or in a car ride where you're stopping every few hours for snacks and meals, because that adds up. And this way, you cannot manipulate yourself into conveniently skipping meals or snacks because you don't want to spend the funds. I've definitely run into that over my time in recovery, mostly the first couple years, where I would travel, and when you travel, you're traveling at weird times. Sometimes you're traveling in like time zones that aren't, you're going back or you're going forward, and you don't really know how to adjust when you're en route. So something to do is to have food with you. I know it can feel a little weird when you're like trying to pass food through like the airport scanner, but I promise you they don't take it from you. They don't really care. I think they see it quite a bit. So holiday tip number 2, the person that you travel with might eat more or less and at different times. And so this one I think is really, really important. I actually took a quote from Dr. Colleen Reichman. If any of you guys follow her on Instagram, she's a friend of mine. Also, she's wonderful and has a great social media presence. But say it with us. The way someone else eats is not reflective of your hunger or your needs. Different person, different hunger cues. I know it's hard. I know it's a lot easier said than done when you do it. I certainly have a comparison factor with some people in my family that I have to constantly be aware of whenever I'm with my family. But you just don't know what somebody else's hunger cues are. You don't know how somebody else is eating. You don't know when they ate the last. You don't know what they ate yesterday or what's normal for them. You don't know what crazy diet culture they might be involved in. And so really, I know it's difficult, but you have to look at yourself and realize that how you eat is not reflective of anybody else. And like it's been said over and over to you guys probably, the moment we consciously deny ourselves something, the more we're going to likely end up craving it more and more, and it's going to be something that takes over our thoughts. It makes us check out. We can't have the same conversations. We can't be present with our family and friends the way we want to do. So try to keep your eyes focused on your own plate. And if you can't and you struggle with it, it's okay too. You can reroute it at any point. You can decide that you don't want to do that anymore. Tip number 3, airline realities. I think a lot of us know about this, but a reminder that the seatbelt will be from the previous passenger, and to please not read into this. This could have been a child, or it could have been someone who was pulling at it before they were exiting. You just don't know. So, I included a link on here because recently there's been a lot of more media articles about how legrooms on planes have been shrinking. That's even more so in COVID-19. Rightfully the airlines are trying to make back, I think, some of their income. But again, just keep that kind of reality in mind. It has nothing to do with your body or your reality. It is just that the airline seats are shrinking. Also a reminder, as we talk about airline realities, that the menu boards in the restaurants within your airport, especially if you're in an international airport, that's a huge one, they will most likely show the calorie counts. So to be prepared for that. And that's another reason to pack your own food if you're headed on a flight. If you don't want to pack up food because you have a thing against leftovers, which I know some people do, I personally don't. I let food sit in there for like 10 days. But I know that some of my friends in recovery definitely do still have feelings about leftovers. No worries. You can still look up a restaurant before you get to the airport or along the way on your car trip, and look at it for yourself and decide what you want before you have to go in and even look at calories side by side to the item that you want. Where you can practice letting go and allowing the person you're traveling with to choose for you and going with the food flow. I do that with my partner quite a bit. It took a while. It's certainly not something that comes intuitively for me, but if we're on a road trip or something like that, and we live in Colorado, so we're always bouncing around mountain town to mountain town. And when we do, sometimes if I'm not sure what I want, I'll give him the control over that. Feels sometimes a little counterintuitive, I guess, to what the eating disorder brain said for a lot of years. But when he gets to decide, then it kind of takes the pressure off for me even having to decide. So tip number 4, Okay, so this one's an interesting one, and this one's definitely my experience and not going to be for everyone's experience or for every, it all depends on person to person. I'll let Meredith speak to that in a minute, but have someone you trust plate your food for you if it's difficult. This is one of the big things that I've learned over the years that's helped me. I've asked my mom to plate my food for me when we have big family celebrations with buffet style food. If any of you guys follow my blog, I have talked about the bane of existence with buffets for a really long time. It's gotten easier, I like to report. But in general, I have always struggled with like the pressure of like when you're going down a line and then you have like people behind you and I'm just sitting there over the food like, oh my God, how much do I get? Like, how much do I not get? I know I can go back for seconds, but do I want it all now? It's just like, it can just be a cluster. So for a lot of years, I've asked my mom to do it. And I know it's difficult to trust the first couple of times, but it can be really relieving to kind of remove that pressure. And honestly, a bigger point to this is that a couple years ago, I was at my best friend passed away in 2007, and we still have a group gathering every year, which is really special at his family's house around Christmas time. And his mother and his father are like second parents to me. And so they know about my recovery, they know about my eating disorder. And a few years ago, I asked his mom to plate my food for me when we had a buffet style thing, because I was in the middle of socializing and just didn't want to deal with it. I was having a good night. Why put myself through that pressure? And what I found is even up to last year, she came up to me and I didn't even ask because I felt like I've grown in my recovery to a place where I actually don't need to have that as much. But she came up to me while I was in line and she asked me privately, like kind of whispered it to me, if she could plate my food or if I needed any help with it. And I think that's something that taught me is that often like people do want to help you in your recovery. They just don't know how. Eating disorders are such delicate diseases in a lot of ways, and they're delicate in how things are said to us and how we interpret things that are said to us. And so often if we've been in the eating disorder cycle for a really long time and we have a family that is just walking on eggshells a little bit trying to understand how to communicate with us, it can feel, honestly, I think it's a blessing to give to them when you can give them tangible things that they can do for you and for your recovery. Like my mom jumps at the opportunity to make my plate for me because I think it actually really helps her feel like she's done something for me in that moment to help alleviate any of the stress or the tension that can come up in our recoveries. So I thought I'll let Meredith step in here.
Yeah, I think, this point that you make, Lindsey, is so important, especially when we're thinking about roping in your support network and understanding what it means to not just say that you don't have to go through it alone, but to actually not go through it alone. And I think you're exactly right. I talk with families all day, every day, and they always want to know, like, how can I help? What can I do? What should I not do? And so having that just kind of grounded knowledge that, at the end of the day, regardless of family dynamics that you might have, I would wager that most people's family members want them to do well, right? We want our family members to thrive, to be happy. And so they want to support you. Again, like Lindsey said, they just don't know how. Or they may be misguided in trying. But with plating specifically or other things like having somebody sit with you when you're eating, not being kind of like pushed off to the kids' table. If, you're in your like late 20s and you always get sat with the kids, maybe having an adult support person with you. Asking for those accommodations, I think is perfectly normal. And it's one of the things that make coming out of treatment and acclimating back into the real world a little easier when you've been in such a structured environment. And that's really where you've, learned how to grab hold of your recovery. And then you go back into the real world where you have, family members talking about things that are triggering for you or fear foods that are on the table. And, you're wanting to challenge yourself and grow in your recovery. It can be really helpful to ask for things like having somebody put your food for you. And I think in asking for that support, you are doing something that helps you maintain your recovery. And so what I would say about that is to just consider where you're at in your recovery. Like Lindsey said, after a few years, she felt very stable in her recovery and didn't feel like that was something that she needed. But at the beginning, it was something she found really helpful. So thinking about that ahead of time and considering like, are there things about this event, about this particular meal or interacting with family members that are causing anxiety for me? And if I can identify what those things are and ask for what I need, then I can get the support that I need as well.
Yeah, and to jump in on that too, something about when Bradley's mom, my best friend's mom, and when my mom asked me if they can do that for me, I think something that is felt for quite a few people in the recovery community is the feeling that sometimes we have to educate our own parents or our own families on our own disorders, because our families haven't done the research necessarily, maybe, or they just can't get past whatever the diet culture infused messaging that's part of this culture. And so sometimes, I've felt I guess resentment that I've had to work on with my own family and with my own extended family throughout the years of not feeling like they took the time or effort to get to know the ins and outs of what recovery, or to ask the questions, really, because I think sometimes they were just intimidated probably to even ask the questions to begin with. And so when I've allowed my mom to do that for me, or allowed a friend to do it for me, it's a satisfying feeling, I think, for myself, that again reminds me that I know that my family and friends mean well, even if they haven't done it the way that I wanted them to do it, or the way that made sense or the way that I would have wanted them to do it. Yeah. And so that tangible act is kind of a nice feeling for both parties, I think. All right, holiday tip number 5. It is okay to take time for yourself. Okay, so I think we all know that you're probably going to read this on every single inspirational Instagram account that you follow. So it doesn't even need to be said. But yes, I do think it needs to be said, because at least in my own experience, I love my family. We are a very close family when we're together. My parents have that mentality that, like, when we are together, we have to do everything together. Like, we're watching every movie together. Like, if I'm going into my bathroom, my mom's like following me up in there. Like, it's like we're, I love it and appreciate it for, about 24, 48 hours. And then I started wondering, like, why am I getting so cranky? Why am I increasingly unwilling to tolerate the presence of Uncle Fred? Why does my aunt annoy me when she smacks her lips like that? Like, it's just it's stuff that, like, when you're around family or friends, like 24/7, when you're together, like, there is, that can be really wearing on our recoveries, and it starts to become a little bit like groupthink. So, like, whatever, and inevitably in the holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving or whatever other holiday that we're celebrating throughout this season, a lot of conversation tends to go back to food. Food is such a staple point of culture, of every culture, I think, in the world. And so when things go back to food, you always are going to have likely someone in the family that starts bringing up diet culture comments, mostly because, at least speaking from my own experience, there's definitely always someone that talks about how much they ate or what they ate, or et cetera, what they're gonna have to do, et cetera, et cetera. And it's, I don't even think that they think about me being in recovery whatsoever. It just comes, so it's something they've said for so long, it's said every year, that it just ends up being this staple point of conversation that has to be had. So, when I go back to is that, I used to feel bad, honestly, for needing to take time for myself. I'd make up things, straight up. I would make up that I was going to go and have coffee with a friend or something. And then I would just drive around and read a book by myself in a coffee shop. And now, as I've gotten a little bit older and a little bit more firm in who I am and what I need to be happy, and to be present, because that's really the whole point of recovery for me, was that I wanted to be more present and joyful when I was with family and friends, and be more alive, not living with this caveat of an eating disorder. And so I don't have any problem anymore. I know that sometimes it upsets my parents a little bit whenever I go on a walk and one of them wants to join, and I'm like, oh, let me just go on a walk and then we can play Scrabble afterwards, just hold on. So I don't know, I think reinforcing this point is really valuable. So if you need to go on a walk, go on a walk. If you want to read a book, it's appropriate, even if it doesn't come naturally for your family. And it's not that your family's evil or that my family's evil. There's just a psychological need to be together when you're together.
Absolutely. And, identifying your needs and asking for your needs to be met is not selfish. So saying to yourself, I'm feeling a little cranky, I really don't want to sit here and listen to Uncle Fred talk anymore. maybe I need to step away. Maybe I need to phone a friend, literally or metaphorically. Maybe I need to read a book. Maybe I need to take a walk. Saying those things to yourself first and noticing like, yeah, this is what I need right now. And then being able to articulate that to other people and set the boundary of like, no, Dad, I appreciate that you want to come on my walk, but let's play Scrabble in 30 minutes when I get back. That's not a selfish thing. The expectation of your family is not that you get overwhelmed or depleted to spend time with them. And you have to remember that that's not your expectation for yourself either, right? Self-care is like the number one harped on therapy topic of all time. But I think, the cliche is right. You have to take care of yourself before you take care of others. Not that you're necessarily taking care during the holidays of other people, but in order to be your best self and your most present self and to really get out of the holiday what I would think you're trying to get, right? Family time, joy, living in the present moment, you have to take care of yourself first. And that is not a selfish thing to do.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. So I put together another little meme break. And so self-care plan, any of this, it's going to be pretty obvious to all of you that I just got a kitten because I put all kittens apparently, except for that one dog. But I thought this was pretty cute. So any of this self-care, of course, I put yoga in there. Yoga is a huge stress relief for me. And I mean, look at that little kitty. How cute is that? All right. Holiday tip number 6. Rethinking booze. I know, probably not your favorite one to hear, but how many memes do we see each year about getting hammered at family functions? I feel like it's all the time. It's really frustrating, and I feel like we saw it all throughout quarantine too. Meme after meme about wine being consumed by wine moms, as they're called, or wine being consumed by the masses, and videos of celebrities coming out with like goblet-sized wine glasses to get through quarantine, etc. It's all kind of a cutesy social guise of celebration and a societal norm that that's what you do with family. But, let's be real. Ultimately, alcohol does make us feel like crap. It's just kind of an instant relief as we are consuming it. I speak to that from a pretty personal experience as well. I kind of like for years just bought into the whole idea that all the rest of my family was drinking throughout the whole day that they were at our family's house. It was kind of like I felt like they didn't even want to be. It just felt like it was this thing that they have to be doing, like, because we're all together and we have to drink a beer and wine like at noon. And I don't think anyone's ever stopped to question it, at least within my own extended family, because it's just like they're afraid that they'd be judged for like bringing up like why are we drinking like so early, because most of the time I feel like it just puts a lot of them in a like worse mood later on throughout the day, because it definitely does for me. Alcohol is a depressant, let's be real. There's no denying that is proven. And alcohol and eating disorders often don't mix. I talk a lot about drunkorexia. In fact, if you look at the Wikipedia page, I was the face of drunkorexia for a long time. Not my most shining moment, but that is it. I've just talked about it a lot, and somehow my face got plastered onto that Wikipedia page. But here's a few stats about drunkorexia in general. Nearly 50% of people with an eating disorder are also abusing drugs and alcohol, which I think alcohol is a drug, so I don't really know why we differentiate. But research suggests that 25% of people entering treatment for eating disorders also meet criteria for substance abuse problems. Substance abuse by people with eating disorders occur at a rate 5 times greater than what is found in the general population. It's hard. Everyone has their own journey with alcohol. I talk a lot about alcohol on Instagram and in my blog, and my relationship with sober curiosity, etc., and the times that I've gone completely dry and the times that I try to introduce it and then it usually doesn't work and then I have to go dry again. And so, I get a lot of feedback from people that struggle with alcohol as well, but then I get a lot from people that say that they never touched alcohol because in their eating disorder, the rules didn't allow for it or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it is a waste of presence, and it really doesn't help with food choices. A lot of times I think the eating disorder cycle can be instigated by alcohol abuse because you lose touch with your hunger cues when you're drinking. At least that was my experience throughout my years of college and living in what I would call like drunkorexia, which I hate that name, but that's the only name medical, I guess it's the only name that we've really called it at this point. And so I invite you to think about that too, as you sit there with your family. I know it feels like the norm maybe for some of you, but maybe it's not even cutting it out completely if you feel like that's not possible for you. Maybe it's just rethinking it and rethinking when you have that first drink, or rethinking, do you really want this? Like looking down at it and asking, is this actually what I want right now? Or am I doing this to like pass the time because I'm feeling anxious about being with my family for so long? So this applies to celebrating to the holidays alone as well. I think we all know loneliness can really amplify the desire to drink. I think that's why there was all these memes coming out about it. So, I think it's proven that drinking also only intensifies that negative emotion. So it's something to keep in mind as well. I included this picture of this book called Quit Like a Woman with Holly Whitaker. I don't know if any of you follow, she's at Holly on Instagram, but she came out with this book earlier this year, and it's been quite a game changer, I think, for a lot of our community and a lot of people that are exploring sober curiosity. So I highly recommend it. It'll definitely make you look at drinking in a totally different way. All right, holiday tip number 7, desserts. So if you've struggled with binge eating in the past, I think this is likely a hard time of year. I have, so I know that it's been hard for me at times too, with just the mass amount of, desserts, but just in general food. I think desserts kind of the easy thing to always like pinpoint back to, but the fact is there's just a lot of holiday food that's around all the time, and we're all going to a lot of different parties and a lot of different social events. Well, maybe not in COVID, but in previous years. So I think there's, for me, I call it the binge tick. And I kind of look at it as like, I'm a lot of years in recovery. And so I think my brain has started to unlearn a lot of what I spent a lot of years memorizing and circling my brain around. But I do think there's a memory function in the brain that feels a pull towards it, because it's what some of us did for years in the past. Like I binge ate at certain holidays. It was just kind of this thing that I knew would happen. And there's also this feeling like even outside of holidays, like I have a really interesting relationship with my parents, my childhood home, my parents' house now. When I go back for a lot of years, I ask them to not keep certain things in the pantry, because it just really sparked a lot of this just this function in my memory of all the times I used to binge eat in their house when I was a teenager, or when I was in my early 20s back from college, or when I was living with them in my mid 20s for 1 year. And I was at the prime of my eating disorder cycle. And so for a lot of years, I just asked them not to keep it, because it triggers some tick in my brain that would just tick, tick, tick. And then I would like walk around their house when I'm visiting and feel that like tick of like, oh, I know that thing's in the pantry if it was there. And so again, it kind of goes back to setting your boundaries and asking your family not to keep things isn't something to feel shameful about. It's actually something that you can step up into. And again, it goes back to this way that they can support you that feels tangible to them too. Because my parents certainly, 1 year I like walked into my mom's closet or my dad's closet, and they had taken all this certain type of food that I asked them not to have, and they had it all like shoved in the back of my dad's closet. And I just kind of like smiled a little bit, because I was like already at a better point at that point, but I was just kind of like, oh, like they tried, like they shoved it off in the closet. So communication has been really crucial in this area, even though we all know it's difficult. And Meredith, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I was thinking, the one thing that I talk with folks a lot about, especially with binge eating specifically, is, for some folks, not keeping trigger foods in the house can be helpful. For other folks, we know that it can increase their binges. And so I think as with most therapy things, there's not always a one size fits all approach to that. And so that may be something to talk with your team about, if you have, even an outpatient team or a higher level of care team, especially this time of year where you might be, even during COVID, you may be going to a family member's house and not in your kind of safe space at home. So just to kind of consider what that's been like for you historically, if, abstaining from certain foods or not keeping them in the house has ultimately ramped up your binging, or if for like Lindsey, for example, if that was a helpful tool early on in your recovery, and just to look at the nuance of that and to talk it over with your team and figure out what feels appropriate for you. And then I am going to transition us over into some tips for the table. I think as a family therapist, these are questions that I get asked a lot, or these are tips that I get asked for a lot, because going home to your family can be stressful. Even though we love our families, I think family dynamics are so complex. Even if they're positive or negative, they're complex. And so a lot of folks feel confused and overwhelmed by deciding how to handle these really delicate, complex family dynamics on top of recovery, on top of our own stuff. So in terms of tips for the table, I want you to think about boundaries before you get where you're going. How will I know when it's time to set a boundary? How is that going to feel physically in my body? How is it going to feel mentally? I know for me, when I'm feeling anxious, I start to feel like my chest is tight. Maybe I'm having a little more trouble breathing than I normally do, getting a deep breath. And so when I feel that, I know, okay, it's time to take a step back. It's time to check in with myself and maybe set a boundary here. Be on the lookout. Think about, are there specific phrases that trigger you, or a particular person in your family that is they're going to say something and it's just going to hit the nail on the head for you and you're going to feel overwhelmed. Think about that before you get where you're going. I also want you to consider your energy level for engagement with people in your family. So how much energy do I have right now? How much of that do I want to devote to this conversation? If I'm early on in my recovery and I'm using all of my energy to get through this meal, I may not have a whole lot of energy to set a boundary with this family member who's talking about calories or, compensating for what they ate. And so if your energy level is low, I encourage you to think about excusing yourself to the bathroom or to another room where you can be alone for a second, kind of check in with yourself, take some deep breaths. If you have high energy, you can address this statement or the person directly if you feel comfortable doing that. So again, going back to this idea of identifying what I need and then asking for it. So if Aunt Marge is talking about how many calories are in the dessert that she just ate, you can say, hey, if you have a lot of energy and you feel stable in your recovery and you want to go for it, you can say, hey, it's really hard for me when you talk about calorie counts, and, can we talk about something else? Or if you don't want to be that direct about it, just change the subject. Say, hey, I heard so-and-so got a new job. How's that going? When do you think we'll be able to travel again with COVID? Whatever you want to do to shift the focus onto something that is more helpful for your recovery. And just knowing that neither one of those options of boundary setting are better or worse. I think only you know what feels right at that time. And you can, even if you have a support person who's physically with you, like a family member or a partner that you've talked with, ask them to help you with some of that boundary setting so that you're not the only one who's having to expend the energy on that. Going back to having your toolkit ready, things in your toolkit might be a support person either physically with you or available, by phone or text, a distraction activity, and then checking in with what I call your emotional gas tank. So when you need a break for self-care. When you feel yourself getting irritable, you need to take a step away and ground yourself. Acknowledge that other people may not be in the same place that you are, and that's okay. You can focus on your recovery and your values regardless of the attitudes and beliefs and conversations going on around you. It's important for you to take care of yourself and to prioritize your recovery and the things that support your recovery. And with that being said, you don't have to attend every conversation or argument that you're invited to. I encourage you to give yourself permission to take what you need, and that may be a break, a walk, to leave the room, whatever you need, but I encourage you to take what you need. And then finally, don't feel bad if you lean into old roles or habits. I had a professor in grad school who would talk about how, he had been a therapist for 20 years. He had a PhD and was a fantastic teacher, a fantastic therapist, and did really great family therapy work. And he would talk about how as he went through all of his training, he got so much insight into how his family functioned and all of their different roles and dynamics and all these things. And still, every year when he went home for Christmas, he slid right back into his family role. All of his therapist knowledge went out the window, and here he was again, this 12-year-old boy in his family cycle. And I say that to say we all have a family cycle. We all have a role that we play in that family cycle, and we've all been playing it for a really long time. And so even with all of the insight and knowledge and therapy work that so many of us are doing, it's still really easy and can feel really natural and comfortable to get pulled into those old roles or habits when we go home. And it's okay if that happens. The important thing is taking the time to acknowledge what's happening, to notice it, and then to ground yourself. And if you're not able to get out of that cycle, if you're stuck in it, that's how family cycles operate. That's why we have family therapy. That's why, we have to commit the work to rearranging some of those things. And so it's okay if you get pulled back into that and you don't know how to get out. Just focus on self-compassion, taking the time to acknowledge and notice what's happening, and to try and ground yourself and ask for what you need and take what you need.
Yeah, and one other thing to speak to Meredith's point that I was just thinking about as we were talking about this is, I have people in my family every year that do make, at some point they'll make a diet culture comment, or they'll talk about the food they ate. And this all depends on where you're at in your recovery. So I'm certainly not saying that you're going to be able to, or that you want to at this point in your recovery, and that's totally fine. But something that I do is, for me, it's my dad's pretty bad about it. And sometimes I will look at my dad and it'll trigger me very deeply. Like it still does every time it makes me irate. That's my initial feeling, is iration of like, how do you still say this stuff? And it's been like, I write all over the internet about recovery, but it still happens. And what I think I try to do that I've gotten better about over the years is like to have that radical compassion for my dad, because oftentimes if I really take a second to look at the look on his face and to look at the shame that he's holding in his body and like in his mindset at that moment, I feel for him. Like I actually really, really am able to twist it and turn it back into this feeling of like empathy for him, because he is still really stuck in like diet culture belief, as is a lot of my family. And so when I can look at him from a radical lens of compassion, instead of like a dad that didn't do his homework before his daughter got home for, for recovery, I actually end up feeling for him. And so sometimes I will like engage with his comment, but not in a mean way. I'll just be like, hey dad, you're okay. And I'll be like, you're fine. It's, it's just a meal. You're okay. And he'll kind of like look at me, and it's almost like this reversal effect. Like when I think now that I've been in recovery and I'm confident about recovery a lot more than maybe the first shaky year or so, being able to give that back to him, what I've felt like I've been able to learn, and to like try to pacify like the shame and stress I can feel him existing in. So just want to throw that in.
That is an amazing insight that I think can be so helpful. Compassion, radical compassion. Thank you both so much. I got so much out of this tonight. And we do have a few questions that I see here in our chat box, and I've also been emailed a couple during the webinar that I'd love to read to you guys and get your feedback. If you're on the webinar and you'd like to ask a question, or if you just have an overall comment, just click on your Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or it's at the bottom of the screen for me, and we will address it. So to start off, a few questions here. One person asks, will it help to educate the plater on your meal plan, and if you're doing exchanges, how exchanges work? My main worry is the plater overserves on portions and is overly ambitious for expectations to eat everything. Meredith, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, sure. And I would love for Lindsey to chime in too with her personal stuff. From a clinical perspective, this is a great question. I think it's one that comes up a lot, especially when folks go home, like my adolescent patients that go home to their families after being in treatment, and their family members are serving them, and they're like trying to figure out like how to explain exchanges, because it's such a weird thing to explain to people who have never had an encounter with it. I think you're the only person that knows the answer about whether that person knowing exchanges would be helpful for them or not. If you feel like it's going to change the way they plate your food and be more helpful for you, it might be worth it. If you feel like it might overly complicate things, maybe pass on that. I do think when it comes to, feeling like this person has overly ambitious expectations for you to eat everything, it's important to, again, have that radical openness to have that conversation with them and just say, you know, I worry that you're setting the bar too high for me and it makes me feel like I'm going to fail. So can we find a happy medium where I feel like I can eat everything that's on my plate and I'm not failing you? Because I think for a lot of us, you know, a lot of people, their eating disorders serve as a way to be good and to be successful at something. And so when you're looking especially at meal completion, that can be a really daunting thing when the eating disorder is saying, no, we can't have all of that. And then the other voice over here, the perfectionist voice, is saying, oh, but so-and-so is going to be really upset if you don't. And so it's a hard thing to balance those together. But I think that radical openness and having that conversation, sharing some of your anxiety or apprehension of like, hey, I'm really worried about how you're going to react if I don't finish all of this. Or maybe even talking with your outpatient team, especially your dietitian if you have one, about, you know, what are some easy ways that I can share like a brief explanation on exchanges with my family, or can you give me an idea of what portions should look like so that I can give that to my family? You know, depending on where you are in your recovery, if you've moved into intuitive eating, that might look different than if you're still on a structured meal plan.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say that that's a really good question because I've definitely like had to go through the ins and outs of that, of having like more food than I needed plated versus like too little food, and having to figure out how to like adjust expectations on that. One thing that was helpful is that, at least with my family, our family like doesn't do traditional Thanksgiving, and we don't do traditional holiday food usually. So at times I've texted my mom or my aunt, whoever I know is bringing food, and asked them to like let me know what the menu is ahead of time. And then I will, at the time, especially in early recovery when I still had an outpatient team as well, I would talk to them about what I was having, or what my family was going to be serving, and kind of figure out a plan before we even go in. Because the last thing I wanted to do was like overwhelm my parents, who are they already get like so stressed out by holiday plans, like, and the last thing I want to do is like set them off with like having to learn about like exchanges and whatnot at the time. So I sent it I sent it before before the holiday dinner was happening, so that they were already pretty aware of what I was going to need. Or I could already have looked at the menu myself and told them what I wanted. And then I could be like, hey, I generally want X portion of this and X portion of this and X portion of that. So whenever you plate it, can you do that?
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Another question. I'm really excited to be cooking some things for this Thanksgiving, but I'm also just really anxious too. Any tips for navigating these mixed feelings? Thanks so much for this. Very helpful.
Yeah, I think my clients probably hate how much I talk about the concept of dialectics, but it's one of my favorite like nerdy therapy things to talk about. So the concept of dialectics is holding two things that don't seem to go together at the same time. And so this idea of like, I'm really excited for the holidays. I can't wait to make this new dish. I'm so excited about it. And also, I'm really nervous about cooking it, about other people eating it, about me eating it. One would think that those two things cannot go together. But we know that oftentimes our thoughts and feelings don't necessarily all fall in line. And so it's common to have this mixed feeling where you're holding both. And I think sometimes it's helpful to just acknowledge like both can be true. I can be really excited about this and really nervous about something going wrong. And to practice that self-compassion of, you know, I'm glad that I'm excited, and it's okay if something goes wrong, or this is what I'm going to do if something goes wrong. A little bit of self-compassion, I think, goes a long way, especially when we have those mixed feelings, because I think we can, you know, on Monday morning, wake up and feel one way, and on Monday at noon, feel another way, and kind of vacillate back and forth, especially as the day or the time gets closer. So just remembering to practice self-compassion is really helpful in those times, and acknowledging that it's okay to feel both, and it's normal and natural and common to feel both, and to kind of think about what's making me feel anxious, what's making me feel excited, and to kind of walk that thought all the way through. Sometimes we get stuck in the feelings and we're just like, I'm anxious, or I'm excited. But if we walk that thought all the way through, sometimes there's more that we can do with it.
Anything you want to add, Lindsay?
Not too much. I don't cook a whole lot in general. It's just not like something I really like get a whole lot of joy out of. But I do dessert for at least Thanksgiving and other things. And I think over the years, like I used to get nervous about it, but to me, I do kind of have a general feeling of like it's just a dessert. Like if it doesn't
perfect.
yeah, like if it doesn't go completely right, or if I miss an agree, if something happens, there's always next year. Like,
Yeah.
so that's just kind of my feeling.
That's a good attitude. Yeah, because that perfectionism can creep in, and I think just remembering it's just a meal, it's just a dessert, it's just this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Great. I'm going to ask, I think, and also getting more feedback from others saying thank you. This is super helpful. Thank you so much. So thank you for tuning in and joining us. Okay, another question. Hello. So every year on Thanksgiving, when I am with my family, there are at least a few people that make comments about how many foods are on my plate. My treatment team has suggested a possible ARFID diagnosis, so my foods are pretty limited because of strong taste, smell, texture aversions. I generally feel pretty content with the foods I choose to have on my plate, but my family tends to criticize or make jokes about these types of foods I eat or don't eat. What might be a good way for me to deal with these comments and criticisms regarding what foods are on my plate?
Yeah, that's so hard. I always wish that, in the moment we could say to people like, why do you need to make a comment about that? Like Lindsay says it best, like eyes on your own plate. My food is none of your business. Like stay over here. So I just want to acknowledge that's really hard. And I think it's even harder when it's your family, because most of the time the things coming from our family have a lot more weight than coming from anybody else. And so it's really easy for us to take that information in and to internalize it in ways that aren't helpful for us. So I'm sorry that you're going through that. I think that must be a really tough experience. Thinking about how to respond to those comments, I think my response to this is always to consider boundaries. The reason being, we don't set boundaries for other people. We set boundaries for ourselves. And so even if someone is not able to respond to your boundary in the way that you would like them to, the boundary in itself is still doing something positive for yourself and will really shore yourself up in that situation. So going back to how much energy do you have? Do you want to just excuse yourself from the conversation? Do you want to address it head on, considering your family dynamics, if they would be open to that conversation? I would hope, and I think a lot of family members would respond and say, well, I don't mean anything by it. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. And that may be true, but impact matters more than intent most of the time. And so it's okay to gently call somebody in and say, I know that you aren't meaning to upset me. You're not meaning to hurt my feelings. But it's really hard for me when you make those comments about my food. I'm already struggling with, I've struggled with eating or with an eating disorder. This is already a tough time for me, and I've made peace with what's on my plate and what I'm eating and how much. And I would really appreciate your support while I do that. And that includes not making those comments. So I think just determining how much energy you have for that interaction and whether you need to just kind of dip out for a second, or if it's okay if you're feeling like you're in a place to address that directly.
Yeah, and just like one little thought on this, because my partner and I have arguments about tone sometimes and the way he phrases things. And it's an ongoing struggle of our relationship. And we recently have been reading this like book on how to fight. It's like Thich Nhat Hanh, I think I'm saying it right. But something that has really helped is that oftentimes whenever he uses a certain tone, I have an immediate projection of what the narrative is behind why he's asking or saying something the way that he's saying it. And something that I've noticed has helped our communication over the last year is not calling him out in front of other people necessarily. That puts him on a defense, but taking him up later when we're just having a conversation. Again, like Meredith said, I think it comes down to energy level and what you're willing to like have the conversation about. But just asking them like, what do they get? Why are they asked? Like, why are they what do those comments mean to them, and why are they making those comments? Because then it puts it back on the other person, to have to try to like understand, why are they making those comments? Like what, what is it? What does that mean to them? What are they feeling when they say that? Is it actually that they're concerned for you, or is it and they don't know? Because a lot of people are emotionally stunted and unable to really express fear and anxiety towards another person. So instead they like jab at them, or just I don't know. So that's just my thought, is that sometimes asking the questions about why somebody says something and putting it back on them to have to answer is can be helpful. But again, everybody's different, so I'm not sure.
No, I agree with that. I really like that point. I think my favorite phrase is, what do you mean by that? I repeat that over and over and over in therapy. What do you mean by that? Tell me more about that. And like you said, putting it back on the other person, because again, you're not setting that boundary for them, you're setting it for yourself. So put it back on them.
Thank you so much, guys. We do have to wrap up. I want to summarize. I actually got 2 emails on the topic of just grief, because a lot of us cannot see our family on this Thanksgiving, or the plans that we thought we were going to have are now canceled due to COVID. So just any last words on just how to address that maybe grief or sadness we're feeling in our hearts over Thanksgiving, and in general, how, COVID has kind of kept us away from people we love and that we miss. Any kind of just last thoughts on that? I know it's a very big topic, but I think many people are feeling it.
Yeah, I'll jump in because I relate. I'm not going home for Thanksgiving this year either. I'm staying in Boulder with my partner because both of our parents like canceled Thanksgiving. Totally understandable. We have older grandparents and whatnot, but yeah, there's definitely a grief because there's this fear of like, my grandpa died earlier this year, and I haven't seen really my family a whole lot since he passed. And right when COVID was hitting, literally right as COVID hit, my grandpa passed, not from COVID. And then, so it's like, I do have a desire to see my grandma, and that's hard because I'm recognizing that my grandparents are getting older and that I don't have that many years left with them. But something that we're doing, just a thought, and it doesn't alleviate, like grief demands to be felt. That's kind of my feeling. Grief is a huge presence in my life, especially when I go home with my best friend passing when I was younger. So first and foremost, it demands to be felt. You can't avoid it. It's kind of my feeling. And secondly, though, something that I've done with my family this year is my brother and I have decided we're going to take like extra ends to like send something down to my grandma and my parents in Florida, because they are going to see each other because they've quarantined together, and sending something about how we're grateful for them. And like my brother and I are going to write out like our top 10 favorite memories from this year, and send them down because we did get to see our families throughout COVID, or see my grandma before COVID, and then also like write down some good memories that we've had with grandpa, and like a few reasons why we're grateful for each of our individual family members, because I think that even though we can't be together, I think it'll be something that like is really meaningful for my grandma. So just a thought.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think especially grief does demand to be felt. That's a beautiful way of articulating that. And I think allowing yourself to feel that, I think sometimes with grief, we have the urge to step it down and to kind of muscle through. And then feelings have a way of bubbling up when we least want them to. It's never a convenient time to feel the feelings that we don't want to. But trying to remember that if we can take the time to feel them in the present moment and to acknowledge them, sit with them for a little bit and let them pass, it will be easier for us in the long run to revisit them when they resurface instead of pushing them down until they explode.
Thank you so much, Meredith and Lindsey. I have gotten so much out of this. I hope those who have attended and listened have gotten a lot out of it too. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion tonight, everyone. We are going to wrap up, but you can learn more about Say It Brave on Eating Recovery Center's website or Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center's website. And we hope to see you for our discussion next month. We'll be sharing information soon about that event. Good night, everybody.